So I'm going to talk a little bit about basically what we can learn from previous platform shifts when moving from PC console or to mobile and then into VR. What can we learn from those platforms, and actually what things should we be throwing away? So I've been some 20 years in games. I've started by creating games in the 80s, copying them on floppy disks and sending them out myself. That was fun times, I assure you. Very limited audience, I assure you again. But over the last couple of years, I've been working at Avalanche with the Just Cause series. I've been at DICE working with Battlefield. And now lately, I've been at Rovio building the Stockholm studio and launching Angry Birds 2, which was great, great fun. I'm also a board member of a couple of things, and maybe the thing that's closest to my heart is, being board member of the Swedish National Museum of Science and Technology. That's great, great fun. Running a museum is like, doing Roller Coaster Tycoon in real life, I assure you. It's a lot of fun. Actually, what's not in here is that I'm also co-founder of Stugan, the indie game accelerator that's taking place in Sweden during the summers, where we send 25 developers into the forest and let them create games. Some very interesting results from that. So moving on, today I run a VR startup since this summer, focusing on multi-platform VR games. We're based in Stockholm. We're trying to build somewhat deeper games, games that you want to come back to over and over again. I think that's something that's lacking in today's VR place. Maybe a little bit more kind of traditional games with strong social components. We think that's going to be key to bringing people back into VR. Leading the game design is the game director for Mirror's Edge. So hopefully we can announce something this year. We'll see. So basically, what can we learn from previous platform shifts? We've gone through the home computer, the PC, the consoles, the phones. So what of those things can we bring over to VR? Many of you comes from either of these platforms. And when I started the Rovio Stockholm studio, we had a lot of people from AAA coming in, and it was quite challenging because they were looking at other stuff that maybe you should be looking at in the mobile space. At the same time, they had qualities that really made us build a game that maybe a traditional mobile game developer couldn't have developed. So it was really about, these qualities we should keep, and these qualities you need to, reassess or change when starting to build stuff. And also in this presentation, I'm going to talk about PC console games as traditional games, so you're not confused by that, just to make it a little bit quicker. So I'm going to go through a couple of different areas, starting with sessioning, and I guess I need to be quick. 20 minutes, now down to 16 minutes. So sessioning, if we look at traditional games, a usual session is between 90 and 150 minutes. Various reports on this, but usually, the sweet spot is about 2 hours that people do play. I think one survey had only 7% playing less than an hour. So basically, most people play for an hour or a couple of hours. And they do it a couple of times a week. Whereas in mobile, as you know, people play the games multiple times a day and in very, very short bursts. For example, in Angry Birds 2, we had the first level was less than 30 seconds. And then as they went more complex, they went up to about 3-4 minutes. And if we then look at VR, we have some session length increasers and decreasers. So obviously, some increasers is the hardware threshold. You need to have that hardware around. There's also the preparation time to get the HMD on and clear your space from weird stuff if you're going to use the Vive, etc. So that means that VR is more of a kind of an appointment-based gaming platform. You think of it during the day. Tonight I'm going to play some VR. Maybe not putting it out in the subway just yet. And then if we look on decreasers, it's obviously quite physical to play in VR. So that might reduce the time you spend in VR. It's also, which we still have some comfort factors with the HMD. This first generation of VR can be quite tiresome on your eyes. So that's kind of decreasers of the session time. So basically what we found is that the sweet spot for the game that we're building is about 20 to 30 minutes. And that's basically, we're trying to build in a natural point to step out of the game and do something else, and then try to build up something so they come back in later on. But at least you naturally can step out without feeling like you're breaking in the middle of something. And what we can bring with us from traditional games is obviously, the creation of deep universes and gameplay depth. It's something that traditional games are very, very good at. And I think that's something you really can bring in from those games into VR. This can be really, really important when we create those universes for VR. At the same time, from mobile, I think one important lesson is the startup times. Mobile games are generally really, really good at getting that down, and I think that's something that the VR space can really use from. Whereas, traditional games, we don't even think about that. It's not important. And also, super quick interactions is less likely to be working. So, games where you start them, you go in, you harvest your crops, and you go back out again. Those games are probably not going to work that well for VR because it's just not feasible for the platform. If we look at tech, it's a quite familiar place. We have the same OS as the same game engines, and talking about game engines, I really do hope you're using one of the game engines that's out there, because I really see no point in building your own engine. If you're going to do that, it really needs to, convey a new feeling in 5 to 10 seconds to the player that this is something really, really different. Otherwise, you're better off at using one of the mainstream engines. It's going to save you so much time. Obviously, there's the same file formats and handling data and all of that, but there's some differences. It's obviously the frame rate. You know about that already. It's really, really important to hit those 90 hertz. I mean, you have a lot more to render, and it's so crucial to hit that timing. So especially in mobile VR, you need to build non-complex scenes. It's really crucial. Same time, when it comes to 3D techniques, there's a few ones that are not that important, like lens flare or motion blur, not that important in VR, whereas anti-aliasing is super important. So you need to be careful what you bring in there and what you leave out. And then sound, good old sound. So much forgotten in games. Sound is incredibly important in VR. I would say it's more important than even in console PC, because hearing the space you're in is critical. I mean, it adds so much to you being transported to another place, to another universe. So this is really where you should be focusing as well. Don't forget it. Also an area where I think non-game apps should be focusing more. Because it's often, slapped on towards the end and not really looked at seriously. Target audience. We got some 1.7 million, maybe even more now, sold wired HMDs, and some 5.5 million mobile HMDs out in the market. We look at the target audience of wired HMDs as they are close to traditional core gamers. Basically people who enjoy playing on console and PC are probably quite likely to be the ones having bought those headsets. In the mobile space, it's also those gamers, but I think there's also quite a few players who come in and are playing a little bit more casual games, maybe are just interested to see what will $100 gear get them, what is this VR thing? So we call them semi-traditional gamers. And if you combine this with the limited budgets we have today, the small teams that we have, you kind of get the games that we've seen today. We have the action game, the puzzle games, the wave shooters are quite frequently used as a format. But as we move forward, I definitely think we're going to see deeper gameplay. Higher production values that we see in PC console today are going to, move into VR, and obviously the multiplayer ingredients as well. It's starting to bubble, but I think we're going to see much more of that, and bringing us to to many of the genres that we've seen in traditional games in the past. I'm really curious to see what happens in the creation space. That's really an area where I think we're going to see something huge in the future. You know, Minecraft defined that on PC and other platforms, and sure, they're in VR, but we're going to see something that's really tailored for VR hitting the market. Then UX. Or actually, one thing to bring with you from mobile is that I think games can be also kind of parts of non-games can be brought into your VR game. I think, for example, in the mobile space, you have a lot of apps that blur the line between game and app. Maybe you heard about Zombie Run, where you know, gamification of you getting out running, and you have, you know, brain training for Nintendo DS back in the days, not a mobile game, but a handheld game. I think it would be interesting to see what you could do there in the VR space as well, bringing that side of games into the VR space. So that's something you can bring with you from the mobile side. UX input, this is really where it's time to unlearn. This is the big game changer for me. I think the 3D controllers is much more of a change for you as a game designer than the actual stereoscopic viewing. I think that's really what's making this platform so powerful. And it's really the place to start when you start building something. Even if you're building for mobile VR, start with the controller, start with what you have. Because that's going to be fundamental for you building something that's going to play good. So forget mouse, gamepads, touch screens, and start with the controllers that we have. And I mean, UX and UI really defined, for example, shooters on PC, and they defined what genres we saw on mobile when, you know, the empire building games, for example, were really tailored to the touch screen. So this is the big thing, and I think that's going to happen in VR as well. So the way we do this is at Fast Travel Games, you know, we try to be really agile, try to prototype fast and iterate fast, and then, you know, test it on a lot of people, try to bring people in. Do they understand it? Do they think it's funny? Do they enjoy themselves? And then play other games, obviously, you know, see what's going on in the market space, because this is a space that's moving so fast. And then don't be afraid to kill your darlings. If it's not fun, if it's something that you thought would work and it's not working, then, you know, you must be ready to kill it. And, you know, you get this right and you have the killer app for VR. This is really, really important. Business models. Well, the current digital marketplace for VR, you know, we have a fairly still limited install base, quite low volume of new games. So it's still fairly easy to get featuring from the platform holders. They're really, really eager to get content for the platform. So that's why today we see a lot of premium apps still working really well in this space. We also see PDLC becoming more and more common, that you launch something early and then you charge for updates to it or for add-ons to it. And if you look at the Vive store or the Steam store with Vive games, this is just a selection, but it's some of the top selling games. You know, there's very few free-to-play games in there. Most of them are premium products. And it's working now early on the market. It's much like the early days of the App Store, basically. As we move forward, well, from traditional games, like I said, you know, aim for platform featuring, use PDLC, and obviously when you try to reach out, it's a lot like building, you know, your indie game or your PC console game. You know, work with traditional games media and influencers. It's really the same mechanics in VR to build your fan base. But from mobile side, you can bring a lot of learnings as well. I mean, free-to-play is going to get bigger as the market matures and the volume of headsets go up. At the same time, I don't think it's ever going to be as dominant on mobile. We're not going to see 99% of the games being free-to-play, I think. I think there's still some fundamentals about sessioning time that means that premium is still going to work a little bit better, I think, for VR. Also, obviously, in-app purchases or, you know, ways to monetize your super fans can be really, really powerful. You have players that absolutely love what they're doing, and if you give them the right thing in the game, I think it could make sense to monetize that in a good way, in a way that they like. As volume goes up as well, we're going to see ads. I think it's way too early for that right now, but we already see a couple of companies focusing on that. And UA, tactics are going to get more important as the market grows. And then social, finally. Social in VR, it's one of the fundamentals of our game studio, and I think social is going to be absolutely massive in VR. It's rare today, but if you look at, if you have a lot of mobile games and traditional games that have social components, but I think that's, when you have a social component in VR and you are there in a space with someone, it's absolutely magical. It's absolutely something new, and it really elevates social to new heights. So this is going to be really, really important. At the same time, today the market is limited, so I think you can bring a lot of learnings from mobile side with asynchronous multiplayer, for example. So you start using multiplayer components, but maybe not synchronous just yet. I mean, there's a few games doing that, but you need some volume to get that working in a good way. And also from mobile, you can bring, chat and messaging is really, really popular, and it's something that you can bring into your game. From the traditional side, you have, obviously, synchronous multiplayer is going to become huge, I think, especially in co-op. I think, doing missions together, it's just fantastic. And one area that I think is really, really interesting in esports, many people talk about that, that it could become really interesting in VR when we start seeing that area mature. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Good. That's actually my talks, and I have 2.5 minutes or something left. So I open up for questions.
Just a couple of slides back, there was a term, UA, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that means.
Sorry, user acquisition. So basically, user acquisition, okay. Bringing players into your game.
You said how important sound is in the VR experience, and you also talked about controls, the inputs.
Mm.
How important is haptics for the experience? Is there a lot of thought that needs to go into it?
I think that is important. I also think we're quite early, on that side. We have the force feedback and stuff, but I think as we move on, we're going to see even more innovative things happening in that space. But yeah, absolutely. When we started adding haptics, it really created a different experience, and I think that is important. I still think sound is even more important, but yeah, haptics definitely. You're all so knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Down there.
Yeah, how can VR be used in esports, for example, and also interactive live streaming?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of companies already looking into that. Can we build VR games where you're there as a spectator watching, Dota games happening, or is it actually a VR game that is a kind of an esport game? I think we don't know yet. It's really something to try and test and see what's going to work. Again, we need to see volume for that to work, because that's the fundamentals of the esport business. But as VR gets more mainstream, we're definitely going to see things happening in that space as well. And I'm really a believer in starting to learn early. I mean, that's also why I went into VR as early as I could, because the companies that are going to become big in VR, it's going to be the same as in mobile. The companies that went in early and thought of it as a new platform, they were the ones succeeding, and then you have the bigger publishers coming in later on and having a hard time catching up, basically, and maybe having to buy their way into the space, like when Activision bought King. So getting in there early is going to be crucial. Of course, we're going to see failures, but we're also going to see some fantastic success.
I can see one chap with his hand up. Maybe a very quick answer, because we have
okay.
to finish it coming up.
Sure.
How do you think ads is going to pan out in VR?
So I think that's a good question, because how do you, in a good way, expose something when you're in that universe? It could be everything from the classic console way of, in FIFA you have the ads across the fields, or it could be something that's closer to the VR, to the mobile video ads. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I've already seen both of those people trying to chase for both of those sides of it. If video ads is going to work, I don't know. Then to me it needs to be kind of 3D video ads. Then it needs to be like you need to be surrounded by that video ad. At the same time, it's really breaking the illusion. So it's a fine line.